So welcome everybody here in the space at the Fondation Beyeler. Thanks to the team and the management of the Fondation. It's great that you managed that this conversation has been possible. And welcome anybody who is online right now, because this is a live broadcast from Basel. My name is Thomas Trummer. I'm Director of Kunsthaus Bregenz, and the prominent guest here is, please welcome Susan Philipsz. She's represented here at the collection with a very, very intriguing and fascinating piece. Then we'll start talking about Filter.
Okay, well, Filter was first shown in the Laganside bus station in Belfast in 1998. And I was really interested in infiltrating the already existing sound systems of places. You know, so I kind of smuggled my voice into the bus station and had my voice play over the public address system at intervals where I sang these melancholy pop songs, sung in the first person, and all of these themes of longing and escape, songs by Radiohead, Nirvana. But when you sing them unaccompanied and with a female voice, it becomes quite radically changed. You know, some people were even saying, like, is that a Scottish folk ballad? When they heard me sing Airbag, you know, by Radiohead. So I think, but I'm singing more to myself than to an audience, like you might if you were performing in a karaoke or, you know. So, and those are the types of songs that I would sing while alone. Those themes and sung in the first person. So I chose those kind of songs for that reason. I wanted to evoke this sense of solitude and time passing. But then when you project the sound out into this very busy place, like a bus station or a supermarket, then there's a tension because you're listening to this very private moment in public. And I later went on to perform Filter live through the public address system of Tesco Metro supermarket for the Beck's Futures Award, and that was filmed by the BBC. So I think that's the film we're going to show now. And then we can show, and then after, and I showed it recently here in the Beyeler, at the entrance of the Beyeler. So it's been, you know, it's had quite a journey from 1998 until now.
So almost 25 years now.
Yeah, and tonight it's going to be part of an exhibition in the Castello di Rivoli that opens tonight.
The voice conveys a lot of information. Amongst it is age and gender.
Yeah. I hope my voice hasn't. Well, your voice does change over time. It does. You'll see if we can see the film, you'll see that I've changed.
And do you get melancholic when you hear your voice as a younger person?
No. I think even with time, your voice, yeah, it does change, but it doesn't mean it gets worse. It gets maybe more characterful. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. This is it.
So we can start now.
Who loves the sun? Who cares that it is shining? Who cares what it does since you broke my heart? ba 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 na about everyone.
So it's very private, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I'm trying to evoke the sense of being alone, which is quite a difficult thing to do in a supermarket. You know, even though I'm performing these songs, I'm in this small little office space, 3 floors above the supermarket. I found it very nerve-wracking that my voice would be projected out into this huge space and that everyone would hear it. And I thought it was interesting to see the responses because people were, it interrupts the ambience and they're kind of all of a sudden hearing this disembodied voice.
Were you able to see the people?
No, it was only when I saw the documentation afterwards.
Okay.
That I could see. But I suppose, I wanted to start with this work because I think it sort of sums up what my interests have always been from the start since I graduated from art college. I was interested in the spatial values of sound and how it can define architecture and how it draws your attention to the space and also working with my voice, the emotive and the psychological effects of sound and in particular song. So I think that really does that. It makes you aware of the place you're in while heightening your sense of yourself and who you're beside because you're not always conscious of, who you're standing beside in the queue at the supermarket or at the bus station. You're just waiting to be somewhere else, but then all of a sudden you become aware of your environment.
Mm-hmm. And your voice was recorded and then repeated or was only live transmitted?
Well, originally it was recorded. And it was played through the public address system of the bus station in Belfast as part of an exhibition called Resonate. And, I was really interested in working with these public spaces at that time, as I said, kind of infiltrating my voice into the fabric of the building and working with the public address systems. And but then when I was nominated for Beck's Futures, this award in London, I decided to do a live rendition of it, and it was restaged for this documentary for the BBC, which is what you just saw.
And do you know the songs by heart, or could you repeat it? Could you sing it now?
No. I think even though I performed the songs, I think it was very important that you didn't see me and that the voice was disembodied, or it seemed disembodied. I think you definitely got a sense of it being live in the supermarket, which was important because I think people felt there was this uneasy, attention, should we be listening to this? Is this accidentally being broadcast over the PA system? It was kind of as we said, it was like this very private moment, or it felt private, like you shouldn't be hearing it almost, So I think, even though it was performed live, it was important that you didn't see the performer.
Mm-hmm. Would you say sound is your artistic material?
I think it's...
Or is material wrong as a word? Or,
well, I
what about the substance? Sound has almost no substance. It's waves or whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely my primary tool. I use that. I'm known for working with sound and my voice and so. But I have worked in many other mediums. It depends on what the work is. I've worked with film and video and sculptural. More recently, sculptural installations and photography. But sound, mainly sound. When I started off, I was working, I specialised in sculpture at art college. Mm-hmm. So but then I started to introduce sound into my installations.
But you trained as a sculptor.
Well, I did. I trained it as a sculptor. But then I started thinking about how sound can define space and what happens when you project your voice out into a room. You know, and I started thinking about my inner body space when I did that, and how it was almost like a sculptural experience to produce sound and to sing. You know, you become very aware of your inner body space, and then how it defines the architecture. And so it was seemed like a natural progression to go from working with to introduce sound into my sculptural installations.
And there's a certain relation between the voice and the body, because the voice is the means of the body, but it's also in contrast. The body is the means of the voice. And how do you consider your body when singing, or does your body turn into an artwork too?
Well, no, I mean, it's more, the voice is, it's a disembodied voice, and it's sung in a particular way, which is meant to sound like it could be anyone's voice. So, everyone can identify with the human voice, especially when it's, I think it's clear that it's, especially in those works, that it's an untrained voice, and I'm, as I said, singing more to myself than to an audience. So so it doesn't really belong to anyone, and I think. But
how's your own experience to it? Is it
my
mirroring?
Own, yeah.
Is it a mirroring effect, or because there's this myth about Narcissus and echo? They are related. The view into the mirror and the echoing of sound. So it's a love story, and also a melancholic one.
Yeah, well, the songs I choose or have chosen to sing were songs that I do love, and that I might have locked myself in my room and sang along to. But songs that are sung in the first person, and I think when you strip them of their musical accompaniment, they become quite radically changed, like unrecognizable, and also that it's a female voice. So I think it's, when you say the body, I think it's more of a psychological thing with these songs, because songs can really act as a trigger for memory, and in a way, and the voice itself, the unaccompanied voice, what kind of things. Quite different from more recent works where I've, like the Seven Tears, for instance. That's more of a corporeal experience of the sound, how you're immersed in the sound, and it doesn't have this strong narrative of other works, like our work Night and Fog that we did in Bregenz, or Münster, or any. But this is more elemental, the sound and how it's produced, and it's just about the sound and how it is responds to the space and the architecture and the acoustics.
Can you describe Seven Tears, which is on display now here?
Yeah.
So it's pedestals and.
Yeah, well,
layers. It's quite minimal.
It's minimal, and 7 pedestals with 7 turntables on them, and each of them plays simultaneously a different tone that I've taken from this composition by a 16th century composer called John Dowland. And John Dowland, he was really famous. Obviously, he was like he came from a time where everybody was writing these very sad, melancholy songs, about unrequited love. And I discovered them because I was doing research for Art Angel project in 2010, and I couldn't believe how all these songs were about tears and sorrow. But it turned out that was like it was known as the Elizabethan malady or era. It was fashionable to be melancholic. And so, but this song in particular by John Dowland was the greatest hits of its time. He was like the rock star of his time, and he wrote the Seven Tears. or lacrimae. It's also known as lacrimae, and lacrimae means tear. And he wrote this composition on 7 variations on the motif of a falling tear, descending tears. So each 7 compositions are different. He called them after different types of tears. He believed there was different types, like lacrimae gementes, lacrimae antica, because it was all used Latin, but it lovers' tears, false tears, old tears. And it was old music, so they only used 7 tones. So I created each of the tones by rubbing the rim of a wine glass. So originally it would have been on the viol string instrument, but I decided to use wine glasses, and the water level would determine the pitch. So each of the 7 tones were...
Could you demonstrate it now with this glass of water too?
I don't... Oh, okay. I don't know if it'll work. But anyway, so everyone's done this, I'm sure. Oh, yeah. So, easy. I don't know what that tone is, but anyway, I did 7 different tones that make up the lacrimae, and recorded them and transcribed them made them each vinyl record a different tone. So the vinyl records that you see on the record player are transparent, and they are echoed in the rotating of the finger as it goes around the glass. So it looks like sort of pools of water because they're transparent. And it's really interesting, actually, because, as I said, John Dowling believed there were different types of tears, but it's actually true. If you look at a tear through a microscope, there are 3 different types. You have a completely different tear of sorrow or joy than you might if you were peeling an onion. Yeah, really, it's reflex tear, basalt tears, and emotional tears. So yeah, and under the microscope,
with a different amount of salt and other ingredients. No, really?
Yeah, I mean molecularly, it looks completely different. It's really strange. Yeah.
Okay.
So he was ahead of his time.
Interesting. Has anybody else in the visual arts worked with tears?
The Dutch guy, the guy who cries, what's his name?
Oh, Basianada.
Yeah, Basianada, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there are many.
And mourning is present also here in the collection, in the work of Felix González Torres.
Yeah, I
How is your relation to him?
Well, when I saw that in the exhibition, I felt that the work's really, I mean, to me it looks like the descending tears, the ascending and the descending tears that John Dowling talks about. And so I think it works very well. There's a few things in the exhibition that have tears, also the Thomas Trummer head, and this has a tear. So, I'm sort of, because I think the 7 Tears, it kind of seeps into the other spaces, and you sort of colours how you perceive things, or you're looking for connections. So I definitely could see a connection with the Felix González Torres work, and how it could have been like the welling up of the tear and the descending tears.
And his work is much about taste, or the loss of taste. And the loss is crucial for your work too, right? The loss and the fading away, going astray. Why this?
Well, these themes of loss or separation or displacement are kind of recurring themes, or distance, these places that I found inspiration in, like Münster Sculpture Project, for instance, looking across the water at the people looking back at me. It was almost like looking in a mirror, but this feeling of being on the other side of, this feeling of separation. I mean, it was a really strong feeling at that time, and that's what inspired the work that I've finally made for the Munster Sculpture Project, The Lost Reflection. And yeah, so these themes come to me when I'm looking for a place for a new work. It often begins with the place. Mm-hmm. Also in Documenta, the work that I did, Study for Strings, it was again gazing out at the platform.
It was at the station, it was the departure tracks.
Yeah.
Maybe you recall that a little bit, or describe it again, Václav.
Sure. Well, I'd almost given up. I couldn't find any place that inspired me in Kassel until I got to the train station, and we walked out to the platform's end, and we looked out into the hills, and we could hear the birds, and it was very peaceful. And I mean, it's a very quiet train station. It had formerly been the main station, but now it's the terminus, the end station. And I thought I would like to make something, hear sound from a distance, and I could imagine speakers that installed far away, and so you would really, the point where you would experience the work would be on the platform. And I thought, okay, this is something that, and I just asked if Carolyn Christoph if I could work there, and she agreed, and then. And
you had a specific story behind it because of this location, and.
Yeah, so then I discovered all of this incredible dark history of the train station and Kassel itself, and why it was such an ugly city. It had been really badly bombed in the war because it had been the place where they produced the Tiger I and Tiger II tanks in this ammunitions factory, which, if I could have followed the train tracks around, I would have come to the Henschel and Sons, where they manufactured these tanks, formerly. But it had formerly been a train, it was where they manufactured the trains, but then it became a place where they made the tanks. So that's why Kassel was so heavily bombed. And the train station itself, when I discovered, was a place where they did deportations to Theresienstadt, and I'd read about Theresienstadt in the book by Sebald called Austerlitz, and also Alex Ross, The Rest is Noise. So that was coming to me. I thought, okay, I know, and then which brought me to Pavel Haas, and he was this Czech composer, and he wrote this incredible composition while interned in Theresienstadt. And Theresienstadt, or Theresen, was the place where many of the artistic, art, musical, musicians, writers, poets were sent, and they made this propaganda film for the Danish Red Cross to show that it was actually it was a wonderful place it wasn't true what they were saying, and Pavel Haas performs his orchestra there, Study for Strings, but then everybody's, when the film's finished, they're sent to the Auschwitz, and mostly all were killed. But I was able to find the score. The score was destroyed, the film was destroyed, but I managed to piece it back together again, but I only worked with two of the voices from the composition, the viola and the cello, and I had them performed and recorded, and each of the 12 tones were scattered over the tracks of the train, so it sounded fragmented and broken, so very different from the original score. So there was these absences of where the voices of the others who should have been there, So it was kind of like this broken sort of sound of a train, I felt, So yeah, it was interesting to see the reactions of the people, even not having known about the history of the place. Or
you prefer to isolate tones and voices and instrumental lines. Why do you do that?
Well, I think, it's by separating the tones, sort of taking the music out of the composition and where you really hear the presence of the person who's producing the sound, whether it's, my voice or if it's the cello player, you hear the instrument more than playing together as one. And I think that those themes of separation and displacement are in the physical making of the work, so each of the tones are separated and displaced, but that's also tells a story about, like, for instance, the Hans Eisler work that we did together.
In some cases, these instruments, or strings even, parts of instruments, become allegories or become individualistic or become subjects. This is very intriguing for me, because you address an instrument as a person almost, as a person with a history, as a person with feelings, as a person with affiliations, as a person who tries to tune up with others when playing in a collective, or is isolated, cannot play in a collective. And there's this series by you called War-Damaged Instruments. Tell us a little bit about this series. This is brass instruments mostly, and winds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I came across these war-damaged musical instruments in a vitrine in Berlin, and they were so badly damaged, you think, there's no possibility of them ever producing music again. But I was interested to know if they could ever produce sound, and what kind of sound they would produce. And so that was the start of finding these instruments. They were mostly horns, like military horns, ranging from the Battle of Waterloo to the Charge of the Light Brigade. I mean, some of the instruments that I was getting access to, it was incredible. I mean, these archives of where these instruments were buried in boxes that hadn't seen the light of day for 100 years or so. It was just quite moving to get to see them and have them play sound again. And some of them were very badly damaged. Others not so badly damaged. So what I did was I got musicians who could play the horns to come with me to the archives wherever they were. First one was in Germany. It was where was it? Sondershausen. And it was in this museum in Sondershausen, and it was a bugle, and it had a bullet hole through it. And so that was the first museum that gave me permission, because it was a lot of them were saying no one keeps broken instruments, so it was quite difficult to find them. And then finally I got a response, and then slowly other museums in Munich and in Nuremberg, and then in the UK. So I had instruments from both the UK and from Germany mainly. So I recorded up to 16 different instruments, and I again recorded each tone separately that make up a composition called The Last Post. I'm sure everyone knows it, but on the battlefield it had a function. It meant it was safe to come back, So, but there was these signal horns, were played to indicate certain things on the battlefield. But today you would only hear it in military ceremonies or funerals, this last post, usually. So they played each of the tones that make up the last post, and and I had them play out into the space. So you might recognize the tune fleetingly, and then it kind of separates again. So I showed it most recently. I showed it all 14 recordings in the Tate Britain's Devine Galleries, and that was really great because I could work with this long space and have this call and response of the horns calling to one another. And like I say, we have Billy Britton. He was there at the Battle of the Charge of the Light Brigade, and he was on the battlefield, and he had his horn in his hand, and he wasn't dead, but they took him to the hospital, and he was nursed by Florence Nightingale. But anyway, he did die. But his story lived on with this bugle. And so many of these instruments had such incredible stories, But the original instruments that I came across, they were the only ones that weren't military. They were actually the only civilian ones. They were from the Second World War, and they were found in a bunker. There was a clarinet and an oboe, and so there was so that gave it another layer to have this kind of to have civilian instruments. For me, was very interesting.
And these brass and wind instruments, they are closely connected to the body again, but also to the breath, to how we other ourselves, but also how we survive, because we need to breathe. And they seem to be a storage of somebody who played them, like the story about Münchhausen, where you can. No, it's not Münchhausen, right? No, it's another story about the Grimm brothers, right? It's a fairy tale, yeah, whatsoever. For me, it's interesting because these instruments become real people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, maybe very often, musicians, professional musicians, they get into a relationship to their instrument. They love their instrument almost because it's a partner, almost. It's also a kind of mirroring again, because they play and the instrument answers or responds in a way, and it's addressing something which reacts again and responds, and you could feel it, but the other person, the player, is lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you certainly got a sense of that from these war-damaged musical instruments, and that they hadn't been played for such a long time, and that they were broken. It was almost breathing life back into them. So you really did think about the last person who would have been playing them, and it takes a lot more breath to produce sound from an instrument that does have a hole in it, So you really, the emphasis was really on the breath. When you heard the tones again separated and coming from their own speaker, you could really feel the physicality of producing the sound, and the presence of the person, that was there, the breath. And breath is a metaphor for life and mortality, and that's been something that has been there quite a lot in my works up until recently. The show that I did with Tanya Bonactor Gallery in Los Angeles, Sleep Close and Fast. Again, it's to do with breath and sleep, and yeah.
But
it's coming back.
This is more a lullaby.
Yeah, that's right. They are working with these lullabies, but they're taken from mostly cult horror films. But my interest in lullabies came originally from working in Helsinki, and they have a tradition of Tunela lullabies or death wish lullabies. I mean, there was a high mortality rate during this time where these lullabies were often sung, and it was a way to, you know, to make the mother also feel better. You know, okay, if you do, you know, die, then you will be going to Nella, which is a place not unlike a heaven. So to sort of reassure the child, you know, so don't worry, and it also made them feel better. So this was written about in this famous book called The Seven Brothers, where she's singing a lullaby to her child, the Grove of Tuni, and then that lullaby was Sibelius, a famous Finnish composer, made it into this Grove of Tuni. He put it to music, and then what I've done is taken the same lullaby that Sibelius made and then brought it back to its original, where it's just one female voice singing. You know, even though he creates the music, it was originally supposed to be a woman singing to her child. So that was the start of my interest in these lullabies, and I had it broadcast over the Finnish television after close down. So, you know, when you would turn your TV off, you would just have something to say, I don't know, I wanted it just to be black, but they just had some sort of text to say the channel, but then the lullaby would come on, but only after.
How long would it last? For 5 minutes? Or?
No, very short. The lullabies were just like not even a minute long. So I'd already done a lot of research into these lullabies, but then I started to look at films, you know, because it was an exhibition that I was doing in Hollywood, basically, and so like cult horror films like Dario Argento's Profondo Rosso, and anytime you hear this child's songs, you know, something terrible is going to happen, or Rosemary's Baby, you know, or The Wicker Man, which is that's where I took the title, Sleep Close and Fast, because they're singing this lullaby to him before he's been lured to the island, and before he's to be sacrificed, they sing to him. Sleep close and fast. So anyway, there's seven different lullabies interspersed with the sound of these muffled drums that are to the sound, the rhythm of a heartbeat. So it kind of suggests sleep. And I also have another sculptural work which is breath and breathing through these pipes. So there's this metaphor of sleep and breath and mortality. Yeah.
This brings us back to the question of space and architecture and environment, and I'm thinking of John Cage, who visited in his famous visit of Harvard's college the anechoic chamber, a space where there's no echo at all, there's no sound that is reverberating from the space itself. The only thing you would hear and notice and experience is your inner sounds, your cavities, your blood pressure, your pulse. How do you think, how important are these aspects of apprehension? Normally, as a viewer in the world of the visual arts, you wouldn't refer to these aspects of a sensual reaction or a physical reaction of your body. This is much more a topic in music. Do you know what I mean? Or I'm unclear at this point, but how would you see these aspects? You said you're more like in the psychological issues, but the pulse is very important for a lullaby. the breast is very important in terms of mortality, because for some point in the history of medicine, the breast on the mirror was the last sign if you're alive or dead already.
Well, those are things that have definitely been inspiring to me. The human pulse, the heartbeat. I mean, that comes more from literature. I mean, of course, the breath it takes to blow through these damaged horns, or the physicality of producing the sound, makes you aware of your own, behind your sense of your own self. But recently, I've been. I mean, not just recently, but Edgar Allan Poe has been someone who's been quite a big influence on works of mine, and there's one called The Telltale Heart, and the sound of he murders someone, and he believes that he hears the sound of the beating heart of the person he's murdered and put under the floorboards. So it's almost like the house has a heart, but in the end it gives him away, because you don't know whether it's in his mind or if it's really the person is still alive under the floor. So he's been someone that I've looked to for inspiration, where I've installed work up inside the chimney breast of the house, or under the floor, or in the walls, So. Yeah.
It's again the hidden thing. You hide your voice in the first piece, at the filter piece, and it's again this hiding behind something. Sometimes you avoid your own appearance. I remember the piece at Ljubljana at Manifesta in 2000.
Wow, it's a long time ago.
Yeah, but it was also kind of a space where you were not present. One could hear your voice, listen to it. It was low, it was soft, but it was very, very there, so to speak. And it was this bleak spot, uncomfortable public space, pedestrian, underway. But describe it yourself, what you did.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I just revisited that place, the underpass, and they've got rid of the graffiti there, but it's still the same. So I recorded myself sing the Internationale, which is a song that is known the world over, and it would have been a song that I would have sang in demonstrations in the late 80s, early 90s, in Glasgow, on the streets of Glasgow. And so I was familiar with the song, but I wanted to sing it in a way that was ambiguous, that it wasn't this clarion call to political action, or necessarily it was, or it could have been interpreted as a lament to something that's now past. So I wanted to, so again, you would associate this song with many people in songs and demonstrations, but when you hear just one single voice sing it, it does change it. So I had the sound of me singing this song projected into the underpass, and the underpass had interesting acoustics. And I remember Francesco Bonami, he wanted me to have it play more frequently. He said, well, no one will hear it if you only play it every 15 minutes, but I felt it would be better when you happen upon it unexpectedly, rather than it become too repetitive, because even from a distance you hear it, so it was interesting to experience it as you approach it from a distance, so I felt that was enough time, and so you had this where some people were waiting in anticipation, or others just all of a sudden hear this disembodied voice
connected to their own history, because it was an ex-Yugoslavian, still Slovenia is an ex-Yugoslavian state.
That's right, yeah. So it was amazing to see how people responded to it and sang along to it in many different languages. That was incredible to witness. But so that was, I suppose, one of the first works where I really wanted to work with the acoustics of a place and could see how you can, the sound can really travel with utilising these acoustics.
But there's also an important political aspect.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Otherwise, when you speak up, when you sing collectively, this matters.
Yeah, it did, and it was, and I think, it was, as I said, people did have these associations and were able to sing along to it, and it's.
Did people sing along with it?
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. It was really amazing. A whole group of people sang together, and yeah, it was wonderful to see that. Yeah, but I think with song, like when you listen to song, or when you go to visit to see a concert, or even in your own home, you're listening to music. You're kind of taken to another place. You're lost in the sound. And I think what I'm trying to do in these types of spaces, these public places, is that you're simultaneously taken away, but also engaged in the place you're in. So it's hard to be completely taken away when the sound is competing with the sound of the traffic or the river or the train overhead. So you're sort of having this feeling of being in the present moment as well. And I think that's really interesting, that tension.
Mm-hmm. And there's another aspect of music which I find very interesting. This is what Edmund Husserl called retention. It's basically the opposite of intention. He talks about phenomenologically about how we activate thoughts or feelings, how something appears in our consciousness. And he always says, there is some presence there if I have a thought in my mind, in the stream of consciousness. But there's always past and coming thoughts as well. And they mingle there. And if you take the example of a melody you sing, we wouldn't appreciate melodies, we wouldn't even be able to sing if we wouldn't be able to hear at the same synchronized moment what we have just sung and what we're gonna sing immediately afterwards. So, because this is a flow basically. So you have three aspects of time present in one moment, and this is what music. The aspect of time is what music really differentiates from the poor visual senses. So you're more aware of this passing of time.
Yeah, one of my earliest work, seminal work of mine, is called The Dead, and it takes its inspiration from a James Joyce story, where she overhears someone sing this song as she's leaving to go home from the Christmas party, and it's a song that takes her back in time to when she knew this man, Michael Fury. Do you know this story? It's from the Dubliners, and it's the last the coda of the book, but everything it's the pivotal moment in the story. This song, and how that it's he, the person, the main protagonist, is having this epiphany. You know, he's like, when he realizes just how much that she had loved this former suitor from her younger days, and just so it's just this really beautiful story. But so what I've done is taken the song and had it transposed onto 35mm film, which is what John Huston used when he did this incredible adaptation of the story, The Dead. And it's the final scene where he pans up into the night sky and the snow's falling softly over the crooked crosses and over all the living and all the dead, and it's so sad. So what I've done, it's like an extension of that last scene where the snow, they call it the snow in the film industry when there's scratches and blemishes on the film stock. So I've taken this black film stock and transposed the sound of me singing the song over a period of time, again and again. So it's never the same. It's just and it's irregular intervals of silence, but you can really get the sense of the time passing, because you do hear like some distant traffic or the click of the heater that was in my room, and things like that. So I kept all of those things in the recording. So you again, it's about this intimacy and the sense of solitude as I'm taking on this character of the Lass of Aughrim, which is, again, sung in the first person. This is the song which is the whole story is about, this overhearing this song. So, so that was a song that really is about solitude and time passing.
Mm-hmm. And was our collaboration in Bregenz. Maybe we should start with the film again. Bregenz, the Kunsthaus Bregenz, is built by Peter Zumthor, who is planning an extension for this building too. And you have 4 floors. It's concrete core. And there's a glass facade surrounded by it, and the glass facade is put like a basket on top of it. And the specific of the building is that you have suspended ceilings and natural light intruding on each of the floors. This makes a very particular atmosphere. So you have a lot of flat surfaces, polished surfaces. You have a glass ceiling, you have a polished terrazzo on the floor, you have polished concrete walls. So the advantage of the building, basically that it looks so photogenic and creates such intrinsic atmosphere, is a disadvantage in terms of acoustics. Because if you clap your hands, you have like 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds bouncing back. So it's almost horrible. And then you have a lot of hidden spaces, because there's this suspended ceiling and there's a lot of volume on top of the ceiling. And because you have 2 buildings put on each other, you have a corridor around it, so everything is like open. You have a lot of cavities, caverns, corridors. There's a lot of space which is hidden, as you are in your pieces. And this makes the sound float, not just a clap and then it's over. It's floating. And Susan had an amazing idea, and this was really a very, very smart reaction, to turn this disadvantage in an advantage.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the space is incredible, and as Thomas says, the acoustics are they're off the scales when it comes to the reverberation time, and I think the only way to make a work in that kind of space is to harness those acoustics. But I loved that there were the 4 identical floors, and I thought this could be something to work with too. And so should we show the film, and then maybe I can see a bit about the work.
It was great to see that the people, the visitors, were very attentive. So the audience became, you got its literal meaning back, a listening group. They would roam, they would lower their voice or stay silent, and you basically turned the entire building into a resonant space or a resonant body. You turned the building in something like a human body.
Yeah, well, I wanted to breathe life into the building. I mean, just to say a little bit about what inspired the work. It's called, as you know, Night and Fog. And, you know, one of the things about Bregenz is that it does have this incredible fog that comes off the lake, and that was one of the things that had inspired Peter Zumthor when he designed the building. You know, and it has this incredible light that filters through the entire building. You know, so you do feel like you're in this kind of cloud with this incredible filtered light. But then there's the acoustics. The acoustics were so I knew when I visited, we had talked about having maybe 4 different works, but when I entered the space I thought that's impossible. You know, we have to make one huge installation, and where I would work with the 4 floors, the identical floors. And I'd come across this, I knew I'd come across Hans Eisler's score that he did for this film, documentary film by Alan Rene, called Nacht und Nebel, Night and Fog. And it was one of the first documentary films about the concentration camps. And I'd already worked with Hans Eisler's score for a work that I did in the Hamburger Bahnhof. And so I, again, deconstructed the score. I chose 4 different instruments from the score and had a different instrument on each floor. So we had the bass clarinet on the ground floor, then the clarinet on the first floor, and then the horns on the third, and then the violin on the fourth. So again, each of the tones, Hans Eisler worked with 12-tone techniques, so I recorded every tone separately, and each tone came from its own speaker. And so the process is quite long. You have to actually really follow take every tone as it comes on the score to separate all the tones in that way. And there were 12 speakers in each floor. So the sound were, you could hear the cello, or you could hear the violin call to the bass clarinet from a distance. So all the sounds, the four of the instruments were separated, and all the tones were separated. So you really had this feeling of this calling from a distance, which again was one of the recurring themes. And the night and fog, well, here we are, this is the cemetery. There was also a fifth voice out in the Holman Cemetery, which was apart from the other four voices that made up the composition that was in Bregenz. And it was in sync, it was in sync with the other four voices. Yeah, let's hear a little bit. Yeah. So I was quite struck by the stairs, and had the same gradation of the stairs in the Bregenz Kunsthaus was very similar, and how narrow they were, and so yeah, again it was 12 speakers in this Jewish cemetery, and of course there was a connection to the exhibition, and that, you know, it connected both spaces, the cemetery and the Bregenz, this single voice of the flute that was separated from the rest of the composition. But Nacht und Nebel was this decree, right? So the Nacht und Nebel decree was where you could be extraordinary rendition, where you could be taken away and no one would know where you went. You know, this was... And so people just were disappeared, and you know, what became of them, you know, where they were buried, if they were buried, you know. And so this was part of the agony, you know, of not knowing, you know. So and they called those people that were in the Nacht und Nebel part of the camp, they considered them to be vernebeld, like, which there isn't really an English translation, but it means to sort of disappear in the mist. And so that was another work that was in this show, exhibition at the Kunsthaus Bregenz, where I had captured my breath on glass. And, you know, and to do that, it's very fleeting. It only lasts for a few moments before it disappears. Again, it's very elemental, you know, everyone's done this, you know, it's like, but it's your breath, you know. And so this was, I called this vernebeld, and then had these images of my breath in the staircase. You know, it's a very steep staircase. It's a place where you're very aware of your own breath, you know. And I also showed that recently in the Tanya Benactor show.
So the sound in space, you have you had this feeling that space is in music, but music is also in space. So it was this, somehow one could feel, particularly with the bass clarinet on the ground floor, I had sometimes the feeling that I can see a sound bubble floating through the space. So it became spatial in a way that you could also see it with your visual senses. And your most recent work does also deal with spaces, but not so much with architecture, more with vessels.
Yeah, that's right. So there's been a little shift there from working with the architecture and the acoustics of the architecture to actually creating my own space. And these vessels, you know, they've ranged from these, well, it was inspired by actually doing a work in Tate tanks at Tate Modern. They have these huge tanks, which were originally to store oil, but they have this incredible acoustics. I mean, if you thought Bregenz Kunsthaus was bad, you mean this was it's impossible to hear your own voice without this echo, incredible echo. You can't have. So it's a very problematic space for a lot of the people who show there, and so I'll just say a little bit about I See a Darkness. Right? You saw that work, and so I See a Darkness was a work that was acquired by Tate, and they wanted me to show it in the Devine Gallery. But I felt it wasn't the appropriate space because it was too big and it was too bright. I See a Darkness needed a dark space. But so in the end, I showed Wardamy's musical instruments there, which was perfect for that space. But it meant that they didn't show it for 10 years. And so finally they proposed the tanks. But they didn't think I would want that because of this problematic acoustic. But I thought this would be wonderful because I had this idea to create a whispering gallery with the work. I mean, I was already interested in this phenomenon, this whispering gallery, you know, like you might find in St. Paul's Cathedral or the Grand Central Station, where it creates a kind of parabolic effect. The arched ceilings or the curvature of the wall, you know, so I wanted to work with that. And so the effect is that the sound, on the contrary, becomes really intimate. So it does have this incredible echo, but when you put the sound on the wall and it travels around the curvature of the wall, it really becomes really close and intimate. So I wanted to try that with this I See a Darkness work. It wasn't how I originally intended it, but I wanted to see if I could create this effect with the work. And it worked because it's a complete drum, you know, this space, and it gave a whole new lease of life to the work. So I was really happy with that. But I wanted to continue investigating these kind of vessels or with particular acoustics, and so that's why I started working with these oil drums. And the oil drums are amazing because they're quite small, but then when you put a very small speaker and project the sound down into the drum, it amplifies it in such a way that it could be in a cathedral. I mean, it's huge. It makes the sound huge. So, and that's what I did with the Tanya Bonactor show, And so I've also been looking at wells, you know, water wells and silos and these objects, vessels that create their own acoustics. So it's moving from architecture to, I suppose, sculpture.
So these are your next steps.
Yeah, it's the next steps, yeah.
So thank you, Susan. It has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you to the audience for joining us tonight. And thanks again to the team and to the management of Fondation Beyeler. And thanks also to UBS, who made this possible, this series of talks. So we are happy to receive questions, and also was informed that I get some questions from online. Let me scroll. How does the quick evolution of technology influence your practice? This question we didn't touch. technology and your practice?
How does it influence my work? Well, I wouldn't say it would be such an influence. I mean, how would you answer that?
Oh my God. Again, I think, in your work, the idea of music or sound is a type of material, in the way Adorno would put it. The latest artistic material was one of his central ideas. And music should not fall behind this latest state of music material, as he would say, by claiming or championing the idea that music should be on the highest level of the investigation on music in terms of its form, its structure, and so on. But in terms of the recording devices, they're not so important they are means, tools. But you told me that you used iPhones just recently.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, it was during lockdown, and I was supposed to have made this exhibition in a mansion in the middle of, a cemetery. And anyway, I'd made this work that was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. And I wanted the sound to emanate from under the floorboards and from down the chimney flue. And so the fascinating thing about Edgar Allan Poe is he was really inspired by these domestic spaces, the kind of spaces that we would have been during lockdown thinking about, so what's behind the wall, or those are all, when he wrote about wrote his Telltale Heart, or the Premature Burial, or the Black Cat. These are all dealing with these spaces, but just ordinary domestic spaces, this in the cellar. So when the show wasn't allowed to happen, I thought, okay, I'm going to make a work that will be online. And it would take some of the recordings I made for the show and have them available to the public. And they could download them. So those sounds were the sounds of muffled drums, because at the start of The Telltale Heart, which is this story about, I think I mentioned it earlier, like Edgar Allan Poe, the man in The Telltale Heart murders this man, buries him under the floor, but then he imagines that he hears the sound of his beating heart, and in the end it drives him insane, and in the end it gives him away, So, but at the beginning of this story, there is a poem about muffled drums, funeral drums, because at a funeral you would muffle the drum with some cloth. And so I thought that was interesting. So I recorded many different types of drums that were muffled with cloth and had them play to the rhythm of a heartbeat, like the Telltale Heart. And so people could download them onto their iPhones, or smartphones, sorry, and have them in their own homes. And then I invited them to find their own vessels, which that had its own acoustic, And so it's quite incredible when you place the phone into a vase or a pot, or things lying around your kitchen. The sound really does amplify and resonate with just these basic domestic objects. So I invited different people to do that. So if there was more than one in the household, maybe 2 or 3, could have a call and response around playing with these the sounds of the heart. So it was actually quite a successful project. Still to realise the project in the mansion, but that's going to happen next year, or yeah, next year sometime. Fingers crossed.
I have a second question. I'm interested to mention again. Has this year changed you as an artist?
Well, not yes and no. I mean, in order for me to make art, I have to be alone. I mean, that's really important for me to. So I need solitude. I need, obviously, because I'm working with sound as well. You do need silence, but just a lot of my work is so research-based. It requires a lot of reading and solitude. So, during the lockdown, I was able to continue to work, and I was lucky to get access to my studio. So it wasn't so different, and a lot of those themes of solitude and are present in the work, you know. So yeah, but of course it was difficult to travel. So that's important to do site visits and. You know.
Do you think we have changed as an audience?
As an audience?
Mm.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, we can't have as many. I mean, we have to have social distance, and we have to wear masks, and so it's definitely restrictions, but. Yeah, but I think people become more appreciative as well of being, you know, that these things still can happen, you know. I think it's really important where there's still this element of normality, you know, that we can still have events like this, you know.
Because I made the experience, particularly in the spaces by Peter Zumthor, when people enter the Kunsthaus, since the lockdown, after we opened again in June, I got the feeling that they are more attentive, more absorbing, more sensitive. They cherish the situation, they cherish the atmosphere, they cherish their own feelings, and I get the feeling that they are more like maybe in a direction, because there's romanticism has become very important, isolation, longing, and so forth. Maybe you have increased your audience, because these are features that one has to have when approaching your spaces, when getting in your immersive creations. Sounds like a final. Any questions from you, from the director's seats? If not, thanks again. Thanks again to you, Susan, and good night, everybody.
Thanks.